will start to initiate the GTOs, and therefore it will relax the muscle spindles. With a training mask of this sort, you basically hinder your ability to generate any sort of force output. What's going on, everybody? Hey, it's Hopper. We got Brutus. We're coming back at you with another video. This video today is titled Training Myths and Misconceptions. Excuse me for a second. Let me adjust my microphone here.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And number 3, don't stretch before a workout. This particular one has some validity to it, but the validity is not as substantial as it seems to be. The reason why people have said this, don't stretch before a workout, and the fitness community moved towards a more of a dynamic warm-up, which certainly has its scientific literature and has its benefits and is legitimate. The reason why people have said don't stretch before your workout is because of what happens when we stretch too long and the Golgi Tendon Organs right here, and the Golgi Tendon Organs will initiate and start to remove tension from that muscle. A great example of this is if you go and jumping down on a trampoline for 2 to 3 minutes in a row, and you just jump up and down, up and up. And what happens is as we land on that trampoline, our tissues are exposed to longer durations of eccentric loads. And over time, that stretch that we're exposed to will start to initiate the GTOs, and therefore it will relax the muscle spindles. So as you jump up and down like this on the trampoline,
we have shortly coming the Emperor and Empress of Japan.
And you get off and you're all wobbly.
Wobble, baby, wobble, baby, wobble, baby, wobble.
That's exactly what has happened, is the Golgi Tendon Organs have activated. A similar activity is if we're doing a pull-up and we can't pull up anymore, and then all of a sudden your tissues just give.
Pull! I guess the car don't get theirs. Get up there, pile!
Your Golgi Tendon Organs have taken over and released that tension on the tissue to keep it from tearing itself. However, this experience right here that we're all wobbly after we come off a trampoline is very short-lived. Give yourself a couple seconds, walk around for a minute or two, you shake it out, and the maximum force production of that tissue will basically, it'll still be there. So you can definitely stretch before a workout, and you're really not going to feel the effects, because by the time you do an actual static stretch, if you were to hold it for 90 seconds or so, and you actually finally get to the point where you're at your work sets, if you were to do a deadlift or a squat, that'll take another 15 to 20 minutes. So with this idea of stretching before a workout, if you were to stretch for 90 seconds, say the hamstrings, and then you go into your deadlifting exercises, by the time you warm up the deadlift and you eventually get through your warm-up sets to your work sets, the GTOs will cease their function and you'll be back to your normal force outputs. So you can certainly stretch before an activity or an exercise, provided you give yourself enough time for those tissues to regain their tension, walk it out, do a fair amount of warm-up sets again. The static stretch that you were to do before that workout, if it's done correctly and for the right reasons, you'll actually garner a little bit more of a benefit for some corrective work. Or let's say if you want to do a couple stretches with the quad around the knee area to ensure that we get better knee flexion. If you were to spend a few minutes on some actual static stretches, or maybe some foam rolling or some hypervolting with a massage gun, and then you take another 10 to 12 minutes and warm up correctly with your warm-up sets for the deadlift or your squat, by the time you get to your work sets, your tissues will be back to your normal force output. So again, the fact that no one ever really defines this term before is what's wrong with this statement, don't stretch before your workout. And to review, the dynamic stretches that we can do and that's been suggested and that we often see on other workout videos, those do certainly have their place and they're beneficial. But this idea of don't stretch before the workout, well, define before. That's where the big problem comes into play. And the last one for this video, but certainly not least, training masks. Yes, these things are garbage. Actually, no, that's not necessarily true. These things are good for two other purposes. Number one, yeah, in case something like that ever happens. And number two, I'll discuss here in a second. However, at no point in time should training in any capacity ever be restricted. So here's what I mean. First off, we need to discuss the SAID principle. Okay, here it is. SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands. Okay, so keep that in the back of your brain housing group here. So with respect to this principle, your body will adapt to whatever stimulus that you place onto it, or a cell or an organism. So if we have another graph here, if we have the overload principle here, and then if we're gonna do time, it's really simple. If this is someone's fitness level right here, the overload will be in red, should be here, okay? And then as they progress, now here's another fitness level. Let's say this is 20 days later. Now we need to give them the overload. And it just continues on. There's their fitness level, there's the overload. So not only should a workout always have some sort of struggle to it, but we always need to increase that overload. And then eventually we can look at it and it becomes a sigmoidal curve, and then the rate of change will actually start to slow down because the individual is already at a certain level of fitness, but this is a topic for another video. So recall this overload principle right here. If we look at another graph here, and if we have our fitness level, this is our time, this is our overload. If we were to do 30 minutes of exercise with some sort of restriction, let's say if we restricted our sleep, or we restricted our hydration, or we restricted your nutrition, and I gave an individual less food to eat. If I were to give them this overload, the ability to generate that overload will arguably be impeded on. It's not much, but it's still there. If we try it again and they wear a training mask to restrict the oxygen.
He uses a mask that simulates tougher conditions at high altitude.
You're sucking for air and it's just not coming in because it's holding back the air.
Once again, if that overload, if their fitness level is here, and now you're trying to generate some sort of fitness program, they can't quite get into that overload. Your body will adapt to whatever stimulus that you give it. However, if you didn't have a restriction, and this is a person's fitness level, and now we use the blue to demonstrate an overload without the training mask, we can operate at higher capacities, and let's use watts, power. Work divided by time, we can operate at higher work capacities, and therefore your body will adapt itself to these overloads. If you're restricted in any capacity, any way, shape, or form, your body will not be able to handle as much of an overload. And if you're not giving it as much of an overload, if you're not giving your cell that much of an overload, it won't increase the mitochondrial density, the mitochondrial sizes, or the number. If we look at the cardiovascular system, the ability to increase the stroke volume will be hindered. With a training mask of this sort, you basically hinder your ability to generate any sort of force output, to do any sort of plyometric drill at 100% of your capacity. And it doesn't, for lack of a better phrase, it doesn't work the way it's intended to. If I were to do 30 minutes of cardiovascular exercise, but I'm restricted, my tissues can't generate the same amount of force that they normally would, and that's the demand that I will adapt to. Versus if I didn't have a training mask on, and I could generate 80, 90%, especially towards the end of the workout, more of my force production, that's the demand that my body will adapt to. Now, here's where you can actually wear a training mask, is when you're not exercising. Wearing a training mask, say at home for an hour a day, that will simulate one of the training tents that we see. The idea of living high and training low. If someone lives at higher altitude and does their day-to-day activities where there are less partial pressures of oxygen, because our lungs work through a pressure gradient, you're, in a sense, you're slightly struggling when you're at rest. Then that will increase your body's natural red blood cell count. Then you come down low for your training where you can get maximum amounts of force production, maximum amounts of exertion, and that's what your body adapts to. You never ever want to restrict your training in any sort of way. Optimize the sleep, the nutrition, the amount of oxygen that you can intake, your hydration, the list goes on. So that's it for this video on myths and misconceptions. For those of you that have any questions, please feel free to contact me. My contact information is in the description box below. For those of you that appreciate this content and wish to support this channel, there are links in the description below to send donations. At the very least, please like this video and subscribe, as well as share this information. And we'll see you all next time.